Welcome, Notre Dame fans, to another edition of the Irish Breakdown Podcast. I am Vince D'Addario. I am the football analyst here at irishbreakdown.com. And with me, as always, is Brian Driscoll. He's the publisher at irishbreakdown.com. And we are going to, we're going to wrap up our offensive side of the football with our spring previews. And we're going to talk offensive line. And that means we only have one more position to talk about. That's on the defensive side. And we'll get to that later in the week. But today, we are going to focus on the offensive line, Brian. And to kick things off, let's dive in here with what you're hearing out of the Goog. And they're going to be starting spring practice here soon. And you're hearing some potential position situations. So I'm going to give the floor to you and let you kind of give the scoop.
Yeah, so part of the reason we waited so long to do the offensive line podcast is because there were so many question marks. I mean, it would just be like, I don't know when anybody's going to play. You know, we can make our guesses, and we've talked about some of those guesses in past podcasts, but to do an actual preview, wanted to wait as long as we could to see if we could find out kind of getting a better idea of who's going to be where and who the battles are going to be between. So hearing some things now. So number one, the big concern with all this, the thing that makes it a little challenging for the staff is the fact that Jarrett Patterson is going to be either limited or completely out during the spring. We haven't heard either way, but he just kind of got out of the whatever he had put in his foot. It just came out this past week. So I would imagine there's a good chance he may not do anything this spring. So the staff is stuck in a tough spot. Do you just project him to a position and say he's going to play here and then allow battles to happen at another position? Or do you kind of say, hey, we're going to let guys battle for spots, see who emerges, and then move Jarrett Patterson kind of in the position where it fits best? And that's sort of the situation that Notre Dame finds itself in. And from what I'm hearing, it sounds like they're just going to kind of try to find a starting five in the spring and then figure out where to put Jarrett Patterson then. I don't love it. To part of it, which I'll get into, but some of it I actually like. So the first thing I've heard is that Tosh Baker has had a really good offseason, and they're really happy with his improvement. As y'all remember, I had Tosh Baker ranked very high in my 2019 or 2020 recruiting class. I had him as a top 50 national player, tons of upside. My only question with Tosh Baker was how quickly would he gain enough size and strength to be ready to play? Tosh was like 270, 265, 270 when he graduated high school because he was also a basketball player. And that can keep a big guy's weight down. He's also incredibly long. He's like 6'8", almost 6'8", really long arms and kind of on the thin side. So there was going to be some weight room work. Sounds like there's some confidence that at least before the pads come on, that he's upped his weight and is strength enough that they feel good about giving him a legitimate shot to start at left tackle. Vince, to me, that's the big takeaway from all of this is that if you're liking a Tosh Baker enough to say, hey, we think he has a chance to compete at left tackle with Jarrett Patterson out, we want to see what Tosh can do at left tackle.
So it's a good opportunity for him because there's going to be more reps available.
Yes. Yes. Now, here's the concern. He's played 7 snaps in his career. They were all in one game. It was against Syracuse because Notre Dame did a really poor job of getting younger players snaps this season against a really weak schedule. We've beat that horse already to death. We're not going to get into it again, but that's the concern with a player like Tosh Baker is he has no playing time. Now, neither did Quentin Nelson when he took over in 2015. So remember, the 4-game rule had not been enacted yet by then. Liam Eichenberg had played a lot more than 7 snaps, but Robert Hainsey played 0 snaps. He was in high school the year before. So Tommy Kramer, when he took over in 2017, hadn't played any snaps. So we've seen guys not play a lot before and step in and thrive because they were really good.
Sure.
Tosh Baker's really good. But for me as a quarterback, I'm always a little nervous about a left tackle, no matter how good he is, who's never played.
Sure. Especially not only has he not played, but he's a true sophomore. Right.
So redshirt freshman. Yeah.
That's not only has he not played, but he's a very youthful not played. And when you're talking about offensive line, that means something. It just does. I mean,
especially left tackle.
Maturity and left tackle, all of that. It means something.
Well, Vince, we've talked about how great the left tackle position has been at Notre Dame under Brian Kelly, right? Zach Martin, Ronnie Stanley, Mike McGlinchey, and then Quentin Nelson. Or excuse me, Liam Eichenberg.
Right.
Well, here's the one thing about them. Ronnie Stanley is a sophomore, redshirt freshman, started at right tackle. Mike McGlinchey as a redshirt freshman started one game. That was in the bowl game against LSU. Then as a redshirt sophomore, he was a right tackle. It wasn't until his senior year, redshirt junior year, that he played left tackle. And Liam Eichenberg didn't take over at left tackle till he was a redshirt sophomore, so his third year in the program.
Right.
The only left tackle that took over as a sophomore was Zach Martin. So to your point, we haven't seen this happen a lot where a younger player took over.
Right.
We've seen guys move into the spot. Ronnie Stanley, Mike McGlinchey got starts at right tackle first. And that to me is kind of the question that I have is, are they grooming him to take over that left tackle spot? And if he's ready for it and he can thrive, then you play him. But if he's not, then do you move him to right tackle and slide Jarrett Patterson in there?
Right.
I think that's the thing that they're looking to find out is does Tosh seize hold of that job, and then now you can move Jarrett to right tackle.
Okay, now, that was going to be my next question.
Yeah, what I'm hearing is that it's not a move Jarrett back to center discussion yet. It's more of a right tackle would then bump Josh Lugg into right guard is what I'm hearing. So that's the dominoes that I'm hearing. So if Tosh takes hold at left tackle, then Jarrett would move over to right tackle from center, Jarrett Patterson. And then Josh Lugg, who's going to start at right tackle in the spring, would then move into right guard where he played this year. Now,
I don't know what you can do.
I don't love that, to be honest with you, because Josh Lugg needs work at the position you think he's going to play in the fall. If you think he's going to be a guard in the fall, then he needs work at guard this spring. He just does. He's moved around so much. You need to let him settle in at a spot. What I would like to see is let Tosh play left tackle this spring, but let Quinn Carroll and, Blake Fisher or something like that battle at right tackle. And then if Tosh is good enough to play, but maybe you just don't love him at left tackle, then you can move him to right tackle. And then he can battle with those younger players, those other players, and then Jarrett can step in at left tackle. But that way, Josh Lugg is at least solidifying himself a guard if that's your plan, and that's kind of what I'm hearing the plan is at this point in time.
And so what we know is that Jarrett Patterson is going to start at one of the tackles.
That's what I feel confident of now. Now, listen, the spring could work out in some funky ways where Josh Lugg dominates at right tackle, which wouldn't shock me, and Tosh looks great at left tackle, but you're shaky at guard. Then you have to think about, okay, Josh has really found his home there. Jarrett's moving to a new position anyway. Let's move him to guard. So I could see a scenario there, or maybe even, hey, Zeke's ready to step up, but let's move Zeke Correll to guard and put Jarrett back at center. So I do think there's some open-mindedness to how this could shake out, but my understanding is, and I've been hearing this for about a month, is that Jarrett Patterson's going to play tackle. Now, the original plan, from what I was told, was Jarrett was going to start at left tackle.
Right.
That has changed mainly because of how well Tosh Baker has performed in winter workouts, from what I'm told. That's a great sign, Vince. When you're doing that because someone else is really performing well, that's when you're, as an offensive line coach or as an offensive coordinator or head coach, whoever you're looking at, that's when you start feeling good. Like, hey, we knew this kid had a lot of upside and talent, but he's maybe a little bit of a year ahead so far based on what he's doing in the weight room. That's a great sign. That's really where you want to be as a coach, in my opinion.
Absolutely, especially with a young guy like that who is forcing himself into the conversation, like you said. I mean, that's when that only gives you more options as a coach. And when you're a coach, the more options you have, the better, as long as you're a good coach and you can figure out, some coaches don't do well with all kinds of options. I will say that. I have seen that many times. But if you're giving me the option of having multiple options or having very, very few options, I'm going to take multiple options because I feel like that makes the group better. And it allows you to, if you are really looking for the 5 best to put on the offensive line, the more options you have, the better off you are.
Right. And I think ultimately, maybe this is a year early for Tosh Baker, but there's some attractiveness to having an athletic 6'8" guy at left tackle.
Absolutely.
Compared to a 6'4" guy that, has been playing center his whole career. I would love to see Jarrett Patterson at left tackle. I think he can play the position, no problem. But I'm also somewhat sympathetic to the notion of, if Tosh is ready, let's let him give a shot at left tackle.
I got you. Yeah.
And so, because that's his forte in high school was pass blocking. I mean, that's why you recruited him, because you think he's going to be an elite pass blocker. Is he ready for that as a redshirt freshman, true sophomore? We'll find out. But I do like the fact that he's earned that look. That's what it's all you can ever ask for as a coach, is that you put in the work. If you put in the work, I'm going to give you your shot. And that's where Tosh is. Now, the player that I did not mention of the veterans in this conversation about left tackle, right tackle, and right guard is Andrew Kristofic.
Okay.
My understanding is that he is going to battle with Dylan Gibbons for the starting left guard position. Dylan Gibbons obviously has the experience. He started game last year, came against Florida State. He'll be in the battle, but Andrew Kristofic has put himself in position to where he's going to push there. Now, again, a lot of different scenarios could work themselves out. If Tosh Baker's just not ready, because look, how good you look in the weight room is just one small part of it.
Absolutely.
Once you put those pads on and you're going against Isaiah Foskey and Justin Adamiola and Mario Mutungavaloa and those guys on a daily basis, he ain't ready yet.
It's like drinking through a fire hose, man. It's just
you may realize, hey, look, he needs to play, but he's not ready to start. And then you can say, hey, look, we're gonna let him rotate at right tackle with Josh Lugg or something like that. Kind of like you did in 2017. He can get every third series. I'm always for that. Hey, get these young guys some opportunities.
But we haven't. The problem is we haven't seen that in the past from
just that
coaching staff.
Yeah, just that one time in 2017.
Right.
So that's kind of where you're at there. But so right now you're in a situation where if Gibbons and Kristofic both shine in the spring, you could see one of them move to right guard and Lugg stay at right tackle if Tosh Baker's not ready to start, and then Patterson slide in at left tackle. John Dirksen is going to get a shot at right guard, but I don't think it's going to last very long.
Okay.
It just doesn't sound like he's up to this point really stepped up, but this is going to be a big spring for him. He's going to have a chance. So Kristofic is an interesting guy. This is a huge spring for Andrew Kristofic because he's going to get a shot now to start at guard is what I'm told, according to my sources. The question is can he seize hold of it? And that's where we're at. There's a lot of talent there. He's got to become more assertive. I think he's kind of a laid-back, quiet kid. He's got to be more assertive, and I don't care about away from the field or whatever, but on the field, he's got to really seize hold of this and say, hey, look, you got to start me. I don't care if it's left tackle or left guard, right tackle, you got to start me. And so there's some encouragement there that Kristofic is ready to just kind of explode this spring. We'll see if he takes advantage of that, but that's what I'm hearing, that there's a confidence he's going to seize one of those guard spots.
Okay.
And then that's going to impact kind of how things. So to me, the two dominoes are of the younger players is Tosh Baker and Kristofic. How do they perform? And then from how they perform is going to kind of determine where Jarrett Patterson and Josh Lugg ultimately end up. And that's what I'm hearing. I am hearing also that Zeke Correll is barring injury or some setback, there's a lot of confidence he's ready to take hold of that center position. I have not heard anything about center position other than them trying to cross-train some guys for who steps in if for some reason he goes down. Gotcha. I mean, I think to me it would make sense you just move Jarrett Patterson back there. But he may just be so good at right tackle you don't necessarily want to move that. Who knows? We'll find out. But that's what I'm hearing so far about the offensive line. And another young player that I'm hearing is ahead of where most freshmen are at this point in time is Blake Fisher. I'm hearing a lot of good things about Blake Fisher and the work he's putting in. Now, again, he's just a freshman, and when the pads come on is when you really separate, the men from the boys. But there's a lot of cautious optimism about him and the work he's putting in. Because I think whenever you have a kid like him, who's just a really big kid, there's this thought that, is he really going to work? Is he going to do? And from what I'm told, he has been putting in the work. And it's more of a, those big kids can just kind of bully people with just they're so much bigger. They don't realize what hard work is really like. I'm hearing that's not an issue with Blake Fisher so far. So that's a great sign. And that's always a question mark for any lineman for me. That's the question more. That's a position more than any other that I look at as a bigger question mark when guys go from high school to college, because they can dominate so much more on just size than receivers and DBs and running backs, that sometimes they don't really realize how hard they have to work once they get to college and they're going against other big elite players. I've heard that's been a smooth transition for Blake Fisher in the weight room and putting into work. So that's a great sign. And there's a lot of optimism that he may be difficult to not play this year. And I'm hoping that the staff is recognizing with a lot of these players, these great players, a lot of them aren't staying for 5 years.
Right.
And so take advantage, get him ready now. And then next year, if Jarrett Patterson has a big year, there's no guarantee he comes back for a 5th year. Josh Lugg's going to be a 5th year this year. Now, technically, he could come back for a 6th year. There's no guarantee he's going to do that. And there's no guarantee you're going to have the scholarship numbers to be able to do that with him because of just the whole COVID thing, the whole COVID year. It's going to be interesting. So there's a lot of positives that I'm hearing coming out of who's putting in the work this offseason. And there's a lot of optimism that, hey, there's some guys looking at the open opportunities and saying, hey, there's a shot for me. Yeah, I got to go seize it. And so now we got to see him do it with the pads on and when they got to think about plays and all that other kind of stuff. But so far, so good in regards to what I'm hearing about the work being put in by the offensive linemen.
So, Brian, one of the things that we talk about when we're doing these spring previews is what was lost. And with the offensive line, we could talk for a long time about what was lost and the talent that was lost and the starts that were lost and everything else, because, I mean, there was the most experienced offensive line in Notre Dame history, if I'm not mistaken, going into last year. So you lose 4/5 of that offensive line.
Over 140 career starts.
There you go. There you go. You were scratching out some math there. 140 career starts.
Over 140.
Are gone.
Over 140.
Yeah. I mean, that is mind-blowing if you think about that number and how there's, 12 to 13 games a year? And so you just do the simple math right there. That's a lot of starts to be moving on to the NFL. And so, Jeff Quinn has his work cut out for him. And we did a podcast not that long ago about how this is a make or break season for Jeff Quinn. This is when he gets to put his fingerprints on this offensive line.
Officially the start of the Jeff Quinn era.
Absolutely, 100%. And that's going to be a challenge. I mean, look, I wouldn't wish – I don't want to say that. When you lose that many starts, that's going to be difficult for any offensive line coach to replace. The thing that he has in his back pocket, though, is there's a ton of talent in that offensive line room. No question about it. It's who's going to go where, what kind of competition is there going to be, where's Jarrett Patterson going to end up. He's the only guy that's returning with – I mean, you got Josh Lugg, who had some spot starts, obviously. You got a couple of other guys who have a start here and a start there. But with significant starts, Jarrett Patterson is your guy. And is he going to bump to left tackle automatically? Is he going to go to right tackle? Is he going to be back at center? I still think that that's a huge question mark. And I know we're hearing left tackle, but him being injured or limited or out in spring is really going to affect that question. So where's he going to end up? And we kind of talked about it in the open. The dominoes that will fall throughout the spring, I think, is going to be so important. And that's why spring is so important, because you've got battles at every single position. With Jarrett Patterson sitting out, you officially have a battle at every position except for maybe center, because Zeke Correll played very, very well when he was when he had to take over for Patterson. But every other position, man, is going to be an absolute battle this spring, Brian.
Vince, part of me wonders if obviously getting hurt is not a blessing for Jarrett Patterson.
Correct. Because he needs work at his new position.
Yeah, because some people took my Kyle Hamilton comments like, how can you say blessing guy? I'm not saying it's a blessing for him. I'm saying it's a blessing for everybody else who gets to take reps with him out.
Absolutely.
But I do think in this regards, we had originally talked about how you got to figure out what you're going to do with Jarrett Patterson first before you can figure everything else out. Well, now we're in a situation where, because he's going to be limited, if not completely out during the spring, we don't know the answer to that yet because Notre Dame hasn't released that. But he's at the very least he's going to be severely limited in the spring. It's almost like now he's the final domino now. He was originally the first. Okay, figure out where you're going to play him. And the reason it's important that this has changed is not so much that there's now doubt about him. It's that other guys have stepped up and said, hey, this guy deserves a shot, Vince. And as a coach, as well as I do that, look, you lose 4 starters, somebody's going to start. You have to start 5 linemen. So
you have to.
4 guys are going to step in the starting lineup, whether they earn it or not. Somebody's going to – it's what you don't want to be, Vince, is you don't want to be in a situation where you're kind of like, well, I guess we're going to have to go with so-and-so there.
Right.
And you want people to seize hold. And so that's why my latest intel report, and the sources that I've talked to are not prone for false praise. They're and that's who I try to talk to people like that, not people like, oh yeah. Oh, so I'm like, wow, everyone's looking great. You have 12 receivers who could be All-Americans next year. Okay, that's wonderful. You're going to score 90 points a game. I've tried to avoid people like that.
I don't know.
So I try to talk to people that are a little bit more skeptical, because then I can feel like I'm wading through like real intel, and I can then put some. So to hear the positive reports coming that from the people that I've talked to is a great sign, because it's again, they're not prone to that. But the fact that you have guys saying, hey, like Tosh Baker and Andrew Kristofic, Blake Fisher, guys like that, Quinn Carroll, that I'm hearing are like, they're pushing because they are looking to seize it. That's what you want to see. You want to see guys looking at this as an opportunity. And now if Jarrett Patterson was healthy and they were just going to move him to left tackle, maybe Tosh Baker doesn't get the shot that I think he's going to get this spring, that we're hearing he's going to get. Again, this is all coming from sources, and the sources are not Notre Dame football coaches.
And we don't get to be there, and so we're not going to we want to be able to confirm that firsthand.
Well, we're going to be digging through like the little 5 video clips that they're going to give us up from every practice on Twitter and Instagram. Like, oh, so-and-so was lined up at such and such, But anyway, you need to have guys seize hold of those opportunities, and that's what made me very encouraged by that, because you mentioned that it's a challenge for Jeff Quinn, and it is a challenge. There's no doubt about it. But there are a lot of coaches in the college football who would say, I'd love to be in Jeff Quinn's shoes.
Absolutely
right now.
Correct.
Because he lost 4 guys that are about to get drafted. Well, 3 that are definitely about to get drafted, maybe 4. And I think Tommy Kramer would have got drafted if not for all the injuries. He still might, but he definitely would have if not for all the injuries. Yeah, but you're going to replace him with a bunch of dudes who are going to also get drafted in a couple of years in the NFL draft. So,
true.
Cry me a river. So there's a lot of a lot of offensive line coaches that say, hey, you know what? I've got 4 starters coming back. I'll trade my guys for your backups.
Yeah, the guys that
your
haven't
young
started.
guys any day of the week. Yeah. Oh, gee, you have a 6'8" super athletic left tackle that's never played before. Yeah, right. So that's the exciting thing about where they are, is that there is a lot of talent to choose from. But talent doesn't always equal production, Vince. And that's why you need to have guys that seize hold of those positions. And now we're kind of in the opposite, where originally it was, you got to figure out what you're going to do with Jarrett Patterson and Josh Lugg first. Now it's, okay, well, let's see what these young dudes do. Yes. And then we can fit those guys, where they want to be.
Well, and I appreciate you bringing that up, because that goes right to the point that I wanted to make, is that even though originally we said you need to figure out Patterson first, he'd be the first domino, now he's the last, you've got him in your back pocket, right. And he could legitimately start at all 5 positions. And so whether you're going to put him into the least productive spot, through spring practice, and you're like, okay, now all of a sudden that's a strength, or are you going to, put him back into that left tackle spot, or are you going to put him at right? All the different options that you have with Jarrett Patterson, having him in your back pocket, knowing that he is there, I think makes the job of Jeff Quinn I don't know if easier is the right word.
It's easier. It's not easy, but it's easier.
But it's easier, and it gives him that confidence that, hey, I've got this kid over here on the sideline who I know I can plug right into any one of these 5 positions. Right. So if somebody is not pulling their weight the way we need them to, if somebody hasn't grabbed hold of a position like we want them to, Jarrett Patterson. Right. You know what I mean? Like, that is a great,
and that includes Zeke Correll. That includes Zeke Correll, because you talk about he played very, very good, and I would agree with that, considering relative to his inexperience in the situation he was thrust into.
Correct.
He needs to play a lot better relative to he's going to be a full-time starter at Notre Dame and a third-year player. He's also been a guy that struggled to stay healthy for a good chunk of his Notre Dame career. So now he gets a chance to go out there and say, hey, I'm the guy. And with a guy like Jarrett Patterson being limited, if Tosh Baker was looking really good, it'd be really easy for them to say, well, let's put Jarrett back to center. And then Zeke maybe misses that chance. So he has a great opportunity this spring, too, to say, okay, I get my shot now to prove it. It's up to me. And if I'm not starting at center next year, then it means I didn't do what I need to do.
Absolutely.
So it's a great chance for him. But it's also, I think, here's the other interesting aspect of this. Jarrett Patterson is going to provide a lot of leadership in the film room and in the weight room and different areas. But if he's not out on the field, there's only so much leadership he can provide when he's standing over by the coaches.
Yep.
So that's another thing that you're in. And this is the time for that. This is the time where it is the spring. You don't have a game next weekend. like they had when Jarrett Patterson went down in the fall. Like they had to go figure out to go play a game. He got hurt against BC. They had a game, 2 weeks later against because they had a bye after BC, right? They had a game.
I think so, yeah.
2 weeks later against North Carolina. You have to get ready for it. So now you're in a situation where you've got a whole spring for him to do that. And Zeke Correll's in a situation where he's got to step in and say, okay, you've got this. You've got to not only handle the center job, but you've got to be the leader of the group the way that Jarrett Patterson was. It doesn't mean you need to be a captain. You need to speak up and, be a SWAT team leader or anything like that. I don't care about that, because Jarrett Patterson wasn't a team captain last year. Lee Meichenberg and Robert Hainsey was. They provided the leadership when it came to the overall everyday, day-to-day, how you going about your business, leadership. But when the whistles, when you were between the lines, and the hash marks and all that, it was Jarrett Patterson that was the communicator.
And that's what all the other offensive linemen tell us when we talk to them.
Zeke Patterson's got to be that guy, because that's got to be a center. Like, it's like when Sam Mustipher, I thought, struggled in 2019. Or excuse me, it was 2018. I thought he struggled that year. But the thing that he did well is he provided great leadership. Because he's the center. I mean, you're the foundation. You're the middle of it. If the center's not playing well, the line's not going to be great. It's just a fact.
Yeah.
So even if you're not playing great, if you provide leadership, then you provide value. And then if you're providing leadership and good play, you're a guy we can't lose that guy. And you've made yourself invaluable, and that's like with anything. And if you're an employee, if you're a football player, if you're a football coach, if you're whatever, you got to make yourself invaluable.
You got it.
You got to make it to where they're like, well, we can't replace that guy because, maybe somebody's bigger and more athletic and faster, but that guy can't provide the leadership, the toughness, and the execution that this guy brings. And that's the opportunity that Zeke Correll has in front of him. And I think he's a very talented player, and this is a great opportunity for him to do that. But he's got to stay healthy, and he's got to, which is not always in his control. I mean, if you get a concussion, that's not really something you can control unless you got it banging your head up against your locker, which is, usually how that goes.
I had a kid get a concussion going through the offensive line shoot. So just putting it out there.
I'm glad I don't coach high school football. Anyway.
Sorry, I had to put it out there. Yeah. But you're talking about Zeke Correll, and I think this is a big opportunity for him. I personally think he's going to seize it, and I think he's going to run with it.
I think so too. If I was a betting man, I would.
Yes,
I would.
I'm very
high on Zeke Correll.
I am really high on him. I really like what he brings to the table. My question is, who's his number two?
Yeah.
Who's going to be that? Because you need a solid backup, because you never know. Well, obviously,
you need. Because let me run this by you, Vince, before you go, because I want you to speak on this. There's two scenarios that you have to be prepared for. One is the long term. Zeke Correll gets hurt in the second game of the year. He's out for the year. Right. That, to me, is an easy one. You move Jarrett Patterson back to center.
100%.
But then there's a scenario where Zeke Correll sprains his ankle in the second quarter. He's going to play next week, but he's out this game.
Right.
Even if it's just for a series or a game, who's your center then? You don't want to move your right tackle in the middle of a game.
No.
Or your left tackle in the middle of a game.
Unless it's a season-ending type
injury.
Then in the middle of the game,
you need a way to get out of that game without shaking up the whole offensive line in the game. You've got practices. You've got a Monday walkthrough. You've got Tuesday, Wednesday practices.
Kind of read
Thursday uppers to figure exactly.
Yeah.
So to me, the long term is probably Jarrett Patterson, but it would be ideal if there was a guy that was the clear number two. Now, here's the question mark. You have to try to ideally find a guy that's not a starter somewhere else, which makes it a little challenging to find in the spring, because there's guys, let's say Andrew Kristofic is doing it. Right.
Yeah.
You say, well, Andrew Kristofic is getting snaps at center, just to get that work. But what if he starts at guard? Again, it's the same thing with Jarrett Patterson. Do you want to move Andrew Kristofic from left guard to center in the middle of a game? Well, then just move the other guy. Move Jarrett Patterson.
Right.
So it's about finding a guy that can get you out of a game, but ideally you don't want it to be a guy that's a starter.
When you want to plug and play
who is that guy?
Right.
Who? I mean, that's the thing, is it's harder to find that job now, because you got everybody still battling for a starting job. So I think that's to me what makes it even more challenging, is finding that number two center, because that is important, especially when you have a starting center who has a little bit of a
injury history.
Yeah, and it's not a major injury history, but
still exists.
Zeke started the one game and then got hurt and couldn't play against Syracuse and Clemson. So yes, there's some concern there. So I think that might even be one of the hardest things Jeff Quinn has to figure out this spring is who's my number 2 center. And if, like, let's say you establish it as, Andrew Kristofic or John Dirksen or something like that, and that guy ends up starting at guard, that's a question mark. Here's a question I have for you, Vince.
Oh, boy. Because
I know you're very high on Zeke at center, and I know you've always been prone to wanting Patterson at tackle. In your opinion, when you look at the options at guard, so you've got the 2 young tackles, Kristofic and Carroll, could both maybe play guard. You've got Michael Carmody, who's a redshirt freshman, is in Tosh Baker's class, talented player. You got veterans John Dirksen, Dylan Gibbons, and then you have the new guys, Blake Fisher, Rocco Spindler. In your opinion, what would be the ideal situation for 2021? Realistically, like, well, of course, Rocco Spindler and Blake Fisher aren't going to be first-team All-Americans as true freshmen, right? What is your ideal? If you say, if this plays out during the spring, that's gonna make me the most comfortable and confident about the guard positions heading into the fall. And again, it could be moving guys around, but in your opinion, what is the ideal? Because that's, to me, the bigger question mark. I think tackle's like, well, between Patterson, Baker, Lugg, Quinn Carroll, even Blake Fisher, I feel good that out of that group, 2 guys are going to emerge and be good. I feel good about center. Guard, to me, is the much bigger question mark for me going into the spring.
Well, I think guard has the most names. It just seems like a grab bag. It's like, well,
most names, but also most question marks.
Yeah, no, absolutely correct. I do like Kristofic being a starter at guard. I realize he's probably maybe more of a natural tackle, but I think he's been around the program so long that I really like him, and I like what he brings to the table. And I guess I definitely subscribe to the top 5 guys get on the field and you figure out where they go, essentially. And I feel like Kristofic is going to be one of those guys. And so if he gets penciled in at one of those guard spots, the left guard, I believe is what you said he's kind of projected at, I feel really, really good about that. I do. I feel really, really good about that. After him, that's a really good question. I'm not sure that I have a particular, pony at the front in my head. This is where.
So I guess, let me interrupt you, Vince. I guess then, because this is going to factor into it. What's your ideal tackle situation? What's your perfect, if everything goes right? Because now, see, this is, I think, once you answer this question, I think it's going to make the other guard position a lot easier.
Yeah.
What's your ideal tackle situation? I think you know where I'm going with this.
I do know where you're going with this, because I think because of the way the dominoes are going to fall, and I apologize, I'm not looking at the screen. I'm like, this is
okay. You got to get that thinking zone, man. It's all good.
Now that you say that I really kind of want Josh Lugg at right guard. Yeah. I think that he's a more natural guard, even though he's 6'7", he's a big boy. I still think that guard is his spot. And so that means that Jarrett Patterson's one of the tackles. I personally like him at left tackle. I gotta say, I kind of am pulling for Tosh Baker to get that right tackle spot. I don't mind youth. If he earns it, I really don't mind him being that right tackle and then eventually potentially moving over to left tackle. I feel like even if he goes out and has an amazing spring, I would still be a little bit apprehensive about him being at left tackle just because he's so young. I would much rather have him take the route of the Mike McGlinchey, for example, where
and Stanley,
you got a couple years at right tackle, then you transition over to left tackle when you are ready to be that dominant upperclassman. I think that's what so I guess I just put together my offensive line. I've got Patterson at left tackle. I've got Kristofic at left guard. I've got Carrell at center. I've got Lugg at right guard, and I've got Tosh Baker at right tackle.
Now, here's the other interesting part is now what do you do with Blake Fisher?
Sure.
Because my thing is like for the future, Tosh Baker's my left tackle.
Sure.
I mean,
yeah,
Vince,
I agree.
You know how high I am. I'd have to go back and look at my rankings. I think he was my #1 recruit in the 2020 class.
Okay.
I'm going to have to look that up.
Sounds about right.
I think he was my #1 recruit in that class. offense, maybe even overall. So I'm going to kind of look that up as I'm talking. But so I love him, but I also kind of feel the way that you do, in that I'm not necessarily, and I'm kind of looking at this from both a quarterback and a offensive coordinator point of view of, do I really want to go to battle with a guy with 7 career snaps under his belt to start the season? Yes, Blake Fisher was my #1 recruit in the 2021. Oh, no, that's Blake Fisher. I'm trying to look up the year before. Blake Fisher was my #1 last year. I think Tosh Baker was #1 the year before, but I'm going to look that up. But I like the experience part of it. But here's another angle that I'm looking at it. If you play him at left tackle, there's nobody you can rotate in this year. Because I wonder if it might not be healthy for them to take a similar approach to what they took in 2017. Not to the full degree where you need series. Yes, not to that full degree. But what I do think you could do is at right tackle, I'd feel a little better about that with maybe a Quinn Carroll, or I'm sorry, I had him number 4 because I forgot about Michael Mayer. So I had Michael Mayer 1, Chris Tyree 2, Jordan Johnson 3, Tosh Baker 4, but I had all 4 of them as top 50 players. Yeah. So I did have him as a top 50 player. Sorry about that. You should get something in your head and you just can't get it out of your head.
Absolutely. Yeah.
That's kind of where I was.
They're all pretty good players. So I
just don't think that I would feel as comfortable rotating him at left tackle. So if you put him at left tackle, he's basically your guy.
Yes.
At right tackle, it's a little bit easier, like we saw in 2017, to your point, where maybe you work in a Blake Fisher. Maybe you get Quinn Carroll every 3rd or 4th series. Let him get some work. So I feel like that's kind of why I'd like to see Jarrett Patterson at left tackle and Tosh Baker at right tackle. However, if Tosh Baker's playing left tackle because he forces his way there, that's a different. Then I almost kind of accept it because, like, okay, if he's that good and because part of this I'm basing it on, Vince, is my own projection of I think he's probably a year away from being a 700 snap guy.
That's fair.
Which is essentially which is essentially what is 800 actually snap guy. And that's my concern is how's he going to be in November?
Sure. As
a young player, he's very young. He's got a baby face and a baby body and all that. Yeah. So that's my concern is at right tackle, maybe you could have him and Blake Fisher working in together. And then eventually maybe if somebody goes down, you can slide him over to left tackle and Patterson has to move in to replace somebody else if you have to move it around. So that's kind of my only concern. But if Tosh Baker and Jarrett Patterson, my tackles, Kristofic and Lug are my guards, and Carell's my center, I'm starting to feel really good about that.
I feel really good.
And then you find a way to get Blake Fisher on the field. And if Dylan Gibbons is good enough to beat out Andrew Kristofic, then that's fine too. I mean, he's a big, strong, tough kid too, and be a really good run blocker. So there's I guess Michael Carmody's another guy we're not really talking about. I've heard a lot of good things about Michael Carmody. I think he might be your way. The Kristofic one is interesting, Vince, because I was always on the same page as you. I felt he was a more natural tackle because he's a really athletic player. But then I did that interview with Robert Hainsey last month, and we were talking about younger players, and he offered the opinion that he thought Andrew Kristofic would actually be better at guard. And this is someone who right. Yeah. And so he sees him, and because he was up with the varsity last year, and he was a guy that backed up Robert Hainsey a lot at right. He'd play right and left tackle. So he sees a guy that, and I know he's taking snaps at guard. So he sees him and says, "Hey, there's some toughness here." He thought his mentality was better suited for guard, which is kind of how I feel about Josh Lugg. Having said that, the interesting thing about Josh Lugg is, yes, I think he's more natural guard, but his best football that he's played at Notre Dame was at tackle.
That's true.
In 2019. I mean, he played better at tackle in 2019 than he did at guard last year.
Yeah.
Now, is that predictive of what he'll do in 2021? No. But I think for me, it's very important that they got to find a comfortable place for Josh. They got to find a place where Josh Lugg is most comfortable.
Well, and I'm very interested to see how he does when he's the guy,
right?
Because he's always kind of been that. Well, not always, but for the past 2 years, he's been that sixth man where he literally played 3 different positions. I mean, he played center, he played guard, he's played tackle. So he has to be ready to play all 3 of those positions. And in the future, he's still going to know them all, but when he has his starting role, I want to see how he just takes that and runs with it. You know what I mean? Because you can flush some of that other stuff and you can focus on what your starting position is, your spot.
But
and
that's
that makes
part of the
different.
issue. That's part of the issue, though, Vince, is if they think ultimately he's going to be playing guard, then they need to make sure he's playing guard.
I agree.
That's kind of the challenge. So, that's all. That's kind of what makes it a little bit difficult, because that is where they have to project a little bit if Jarrett Patterson can't go. Because, like you said, they haven't seen Jarrett Patterson at tackle. Well, not since his freshman year. I mean, they've seen Jarrett Patterson at tackle. He played tackle as a freshman. They didn't move him to center until he was a sophomore. So it's not like they've never seen Jarrett Patterson at tackle. They know what Jarrett Patterson can do at tackle to a degree. Some idea.
Yeah, right.
I just feel like if you're locked in on him being one of the tackles, then let those young players get those reps. Let Blake Fisher get extra reps. Let Quinn Carroll get the extra reps. Let Tosh Baker get the extra reps. See what they do. Because honestly, Vince, they're playing Florida State in the opener. I don't know who Florida State's defensive ends are going to be, but they're going to be athletic. That I can say. I don't know if they're going to be good, but they're going to be athletic. You got to play Wisconsin in the first month of the season. You got to play Purdue and George Karlaftis in the first month of the season. You're going to have a trial by fire in September. So why not start that in March and April? And so that's kind of my thing is let those young guys throw their feet to the fire. Put Josh Lugg at guard. Let him solidify that spot. Let him and Zeke, because him and Zeke Carell need to. If those are two guys you project to be inside starters,
they need to work together.
They need to work together. So I would like to see the staff be a little bit bold and not be conservative and say, look, if this thing goes how we think it's going to go, Josh Lugg's our right guard, Zeke Carell's our center, and Jarrett Patterson's one of the two tackles.
Sure.
Okay. So now if you're 2 weeks in and Tosh just isn't cutting it, and look, Tosh, he's just not ready yet, then you could always move Josh Lugg back out to tackle. I would rather do that than to have him at tackle, hoping to move him to guard. Let him play guard, then give those young bucks those chances. And if they can't do it and they can't make it, then we can talk about whether or not they're, okay, now we got to do something else. Now the second half of spring ball, we're going to get Josh back out at tackle. Because that's the other thing the teams will do is for the first 8 practices, we're going to work so-and-so. We're going to work this guy here, and that's what we're going to see what he can do. And if he can't handle it, then say, okay, now for the final 7 practices, we're going to move Josh Lugg. What you don't want to do, to me, is move Josh Lugg somewhere and then move him to a different position that maybe he's not going to play in the fall.
Right.
So let those young guys get that shot early in spring. And then if they fail, then you can move Josh Lugg back out to right tackle with the thought of his last 5-6 practices are going to be at tackle, and that's where he's going to start in the fall. You want to start getting some idea, but I don't think you want to start him at tackle and then hope that he's going to move to guard. Let him get that work at guard, because in a perfect world, there's a chance that he starts at guard and then stays at guard because those other guys stepped up. Because it's a similar thing as he starts at tackle, moves to guard, and guards we're going to play him in the fall. It's the same philosophy that I was talking about before. The difference is if you start him at guard and things go well, then you just leave him at guard. If you start him at tackle and you're hoping to move him, then eventually, and things go well, you're going to move him. But if things go well, then, and you can leave him in one spot, to me, that's the ideal scenario that you want to find yourself in. So that's why I would start him at guard. I understand why they may not do that, but that to me is what I would do if I was in their shoes. And then let those young guys, like you said, the whole drinking through a fire hose thing, let them do that.
Sure.
Because if they can't handle
spring is for, though.
If they can't handle that in April, they are definitely not going to be able to handle that in September when they're playing, against other teams and when the games matter.
Exactly.
So that's what the spring should be about, to your point. And I want to see Michael Carmody. I want to see Blake Fisher. There's a lot of numbers here, and Caleb Johnson's also an early enrollee, so they're going to have plenty of bodies. I just want to see kind of who steps up and who continues to seize it once the pads go on. It's great to hear the stuff we talked about at the beginning, through winter workouts. But as you know, Vince, every year there's guys that look great in winter workouts and summer workouts, and then the pads come on, and it's like he's not as good as we thought he would. Because some guys, we called them half-speed heroes when I was coaching.
Oh yeah,
walk through all Americans kind of thing, look great in the pads, look great in the weight room. But then it comes down to, playing grown man football. And it's like, I kind of like the idea of not having pads on and getting hit. And so, that's kind of where I'm at. So it's a lot of talent, Vince. I think, we normally do like a 3 questions at the end. I think we kind of already addressed like 9 questions.
Absolutely.
I
was thinking the same thing.
Where's Patterson going to be? Who steps up at guard? Can guys stay healthy? Where's Josh Love going to play? There's so many question marks at offensive line.
Who's going to be number 2 at
our
center?
Our spring question is, what's going to happen?
Yeah,
Let's just we have one spring question. What the heck's going to happen over this next month and a half? But that's an exciting thing because this is the group that's ultimately going to determine how they're going to be. Here's my big question, and I'm going to go back to a topic we've talked about before. The best thing that this staff can do for this offensive line is make the offensive scheme and philosophical changes we've talked about. Because here's the great thing about being more of a spreading the field formationally, whether you're in 12 or 13 personnel or not, but spread the field out. It takes away less defenders in the box. If you are running RPOs, if you're running things like that, if you're having an offense that is more modern, it takes a lot of pressure off the offensive line. If you run the system you've been running, you're going to have a lot of growing pains this year. We saw it in 2018. We even saw it in 2019 because if it's so driven by you have to play great offensive line, not just good, but you have to be great. Asking an offensive line with 4 new starters to be great, meaning top 5 O-line, is too much.
Too much.
I do think they can be a top 10 O-line.
Sure.
But if you open up the offense, if you make it to where you're attacking teams on the perimeter, I was breaking down in the course of a day, I broke down Notre Dame film, I broke down Oklahoma film, and I broke down Alabama film. And it amazes me how many 9-man boxes Notre Dame faces, and I never see Oklahoma facing that. And they run for more yards than Notre Dame does most seasons. They do. And just because of just the alignments that Notre Dame uses, because when they go 12 and 13 personnel, they're so heavy on the run, so that's the thing for me. I mean, Oklahoma in 2019 averaged 240 yards per game. They averaged 247 the year before that, 217 the year before that. They're a team that likes to run the football. And they do it out of a lot of spread sets, and their offensive line always plays well no matter how many guys they lose because their system, the offensive line has to play well, but it doesn't put so much on their shoulders that they have to carry the team.
Right.
And that's where those scheme changes could fit and are important. And if you do that, then I think the offensive line is going to play. If you continue to do what you've been doing, which is the ball control, running it from no RPOs and a lot of 12 personnel, then your offensive line is going to struggle because you're asking them to play a level of football you should not be asking a unit with 4 brand new starters and 5 guys at new positions. That's just my opinion. So if those two things go hand in hand, I'm confident that when we get to the end of the 2021 season, we're going to say, yeah, this line played really good. And boy, I cannot wait to see what this group is going to do in 2022.
Well, and I'm excited to see what this group can do in 2021. And I'm very excited to see how these little battles shake out. And it would be, if we were there, this would be one of the major things that I'd be keeping an eye on would be this offensive line and who's lining up with the 1s, who's lining up with the 2s, and what that looks like. And just all of that different stuff. I mean, I love watching O-line play. So once again, something to be disappointed about with not being at spring practice. But we've gone over that many times. So that is going to do it for our final offensive position going into spring practice, the offensive line. We have one more defensive position to discuss, and we will do that a little bit later in the week. And then we'll be done. And then we're going to kind of do kind of a wrap, kind of a moving into spring practice podcast, which I'm really looking forward to because spring practice is right around the corner. So,
it's going to start this weekend.
Yeah. So make sure you stay locked into irishbreakdown.com. Of course, we're going to have all kinds of good stuff on our podcast and then, of course, on the YouTube channel as well. So hit that subscribe button, hit that notification button wherever you are, and we will keep bringing all of the information your way. So, for Brian Driscoll, I am Vince D'Addario, and you've been listening to the Irish Breakdown Podcast.